For a brief period of time, during the 2023 college football season, it seemed that all of America were rooting for the Colorado Buffaloes. After a brutal 1-11 season in 2022, the Buffs were in a position we hadn't seen in quite a while. The 2023 offseason was an incredibly productive one for Colorado. Their first matter of business was hiring Deionsanders to be the new head coach for the franchise. The Hall of Fame corner had seen quite a bit of success as the head coach for Jackson State, leading them to back-to-back 11-win seasons and having an overall record of 27-7 in his career with Jackson State. He was looking to bring that same success to Boulder, but naturally came quite a few questions. Considerably, the competition level was much greater with Colorado than it was at Jackson State, and how was he going to command the locker room? The offseason got better for the Buffs. Not only did they get their new head coach, but they got a total roster overhaul and had one of the best transfer classes in America, bringing over both Deion's sons, Shiloh and Shadur, and also bringing in former number one recruit Travishunter. Colorado now had attention at a national level, which I ultimately believe was this team's downfall last year. Colorado had an over-under of 3.5 wins entering the 2023 season. And Colorado got off to a blazing hot start, not only starting 3-0, but entering the top 25 for a brief period of time. The hype train around Colorado was truly unreal. And unfortunately, everything came crashing down for the Buffs. They went on to finish the season 1-8, and the season completely went up in flames. But what if I told you it wasn't as bad as it seemed for Colorado in 2023? Yes, the record is bad, but I don't believe we need to let last year's shortcomings affect how we view the 2024 team and overall roster. In today's video, I'm going to be going over some of the biggest X factors for Colorado, breaking down the 2023 season and what really went wrong, and looking ahead to the revamped roster in 2024, and telling you why I believe this team truly can compete for the college football playoff. If you guys are new around here, I do tons of content involving college football, the NFL draft, and much more. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also check out my Patreon, which I'll have linked down below, where I have tons of exclusive NFL and college football content that I think many of you guys will enjoy, as well as my in-depth draft guide. But let's take a look at this Colorado roster. The biggest reason it seems people have turned on Colorado so quickly is the confidence. Going back to his playing days, Deionsanders has always been a guy who is the most confident guy in the building, and it rubs off on the players. You can see it in the way they play, and from the get-go, Deion let America know, we're coming. There's a level of confidence to this team that you don't really see, and when you go 4-8, you're going to get clowned a little bit for it. However, I think people look at the final record and overreact just a little bit. Number one, this was a team that wasn't expected to be good. They hit the over on their win total, and they overall exceeded all expectations that we should have had for this team going in. After the team started 3-0, people were talking about the college football playoff as a potential option for this team, but those goals were never realistic for this team. I think last year, the goal for this was to figure out what type of culture Deion was going to bring to Colorado, and I think we know that. On top of that, the Pac-12 was stacked with talent last year. Colorado never really felt out of any game. Now, I know that sounds crazy. The Oregon and the Washington State games were complete blowouts, but in a schedule that included USC, Arizona, Utah, and Oregon State, Colorado was within one possession in every single one of those games. People look at the final record and fail to acknowledge that they were never truly out of it. Now, there were games that they should have won. They should have beat UCLA. They shouldn't have blown the massive lead to Stanford. But this team was competitive against the best teams in college football, and I think people fail to acknowledge that reality. Not only did Colorado have a brutal schedule, but they also had some of the worst trench play in all of college football. They had an absolutely atrocious offensive and defensive line. They ranked in the bottom half in all major statistics on both the offensive and defensive line. Let's start with the offensive line. It was unbelievably poor last season. Shedeur Sanders was pressured a whopping 107 times in the 2023 season. To put that in perspective, Sanders only had 435 pass attempts on the year. Sanders was nearly pressured on a quarter of his dropbacks last season, which is absolutely ridiculous. The offensive line was a complete and utter disaster from top to bottom, and it's hard to expect your quarterback to put up elite numbers and keep your team in a game when he's under duress so much of the game. And even despite the offensive line woes, Sanders still graded out as one of the top quarterbacks in college football, threw for 3,300 yards, and had a nearly 80% adjusted completion percentage. The pass protection was bad, but so was the run blocking. Early on, freshman running back Dylan Edwards really got things going, but the run blocking was towards the bottom on the college football. They were a team that wasn't able to consistently generate yards on the ground at really any point during the season, and the offense really struggled down the stretch as a result, and they couldn't really get points on the board. They just couldn't move the ball effectively because they had no run game, and Shedeur Sanders was under pressure really the entire game. The defensive line was just as bad, though. From a very early point in the season, it was very apparent that the defensive line was not going to be able to stop the run. You saw it in the first game of the year against TCU, and it stayed true all season long. The Buffs finished as the 12th worst team in terms of run defense on the season, and the pass rush was also incredibly underwhelming, ranking as the 37th worst team in the country. As a generalization, teams that can't protect up front and can't create pressure, they're never going to be successful. And we saw that with last year's team. I hate to regurgitate old points made about this Buffaloes team because Colorado fans have heard enough all offseason. The offensive line was bad. The defensive line was bad. But I think people overreact a little bit. This team wasn't as bad as everyone seems to make it out to be. It feels too often on social media, there's a narrative that Colorado was one of the worst teams ever. And all the points made, I don't think are fully thought out, nor are they educated. Things weren't all bad for Colorado. Shedeur Sanders was fantastic for Colorado last year as a passer, despite not having the most elite weapons around him. The coverage was also really good for Colorado last year. Obviously, it's better when Travishunter's on the field playing, and he missed some time due to a concussion, but there were some great things to build on with Colorado, and it set the groundwork for what is to come. And that was the point of the 2023 season with Colorado. This was a team that was trying to build the culture, trying to figure out what their identity was going to be, and I think they did that. And so a lot of people are wondering, why should we believe in Colorado in 2024? We saw what they did last year, and it didn't seem like this team was much other than an attention grab and just to get clicks on social media. But I think Colorado had one of the most impressive off seasons I've seen in quite a while, both in the recruiting class as well as in the transfer portal. And I think this is a team that we really have to take seriously entering the 2024 season. For one thing, the Pac-12 no longer exists. The claim that Colorado played one of the toughest schedules in the country, which is true, they don't have some of those opponents on their schedule anymore. There is no more USC. There is no more Oregon. The schedule for Colorado is a lot more manageable in 2024. While the new look Big 12 has some very interesting teams, there doesn't seem to be an early standout favorite. And I think Colorado could really surprise some people and put themselves in contention for the Big 12 simply due to the fact that the conference isn't as deep as the Pac-12 was last year. Another thing that I think is really flying under the radar with this Colorado team is the continuity. This isn't the first year anymore. The returning players know the culture. They know what they're building. There's chemistry in that building that the Buffs didn't have last year. I think that's an underrated part about all this. Expectations are usually low for a first-year head coach. Let's take a look at Texas A&M, who has Matt Elko as their first-year head coach. Nobody is expecting Texas A&M to go all the way, go to the college football playoffs. So why did we put those expectations on Coach Prime last year? It felt no matter what he did, that if he didn't bring a college football playoff championship to Colorado, he was going to fall short in people's eyes. But this year, I think it kind of works in Colorado's favor. There are no expectations for this team. This is a team that many people are expecting to be bad and lose to North Dakota State in week 1, which I think is absolutely outrageous. This team knows their identity. They know what they're going to try to do. I think they can make some serious noise. Another talking point that I've heard all offseason long was how bad the culture was, and that's why they lost 41 players to the transfer portal. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and act like that's not a ridiculously large amount of players, but I want a lot of people to go through that list and find me players that really they lost. Center Van Wells played well for them last year. Cornerback Cormani McLean, running back Dylan Edwards, they're all players that made impacts for this team last year, and I'm sure they'd love to have those guys back. But this is also a team that completely loaded up on talent on both sides of the ball and have positioned themselves to be one of the better rosters in the Big 12. We talked about how much of a disaster the O-line was for Colorado last year. I would be completely shocked if this team was anywhere close to the bottom this upcoming season. Justin Mayers is a former 3-star recruit from UTEP who started nearly every game for the Miners in 2023, and he was incredibly productive. He was PFF's 18th highest rated guard on the season, and where he really impressed was pass protection. He had an 86.1 pass blocking grade, which is good enough to put him at 10th in the FBS. He only allowed 1 sack and 2 hits on the year, and this is a Colorado team that loved to pass the ball last year, and he fits right in, slot him in as a starting guard, and I think he's going to be a very impactful player right from the jump and really help this offensive line. Tyler Johnson is the big name that people are talking about from this class, a former 4-star who initially recruited to Texas, but has been playing the last 2 seasons with the Houston Cougars, and while he didn't grade out quite as good as Mayers, he finished the year with a 77.2 pass blocking grade, and once again, only allowed 1 sack on the year. With Johnson and Mayers as your guards on the interior, Colorado should be feeling good about that. But they made more moves on the offensive line that if I was a Colorado fan, I'd have a lot of hope about. They brought in Indiana guard Khalil Benson, a player who hasn't fully developed yet, but has shown some upside, particularly in the run blocking department. On top of that, they brought in UConn center Yakiri Walker, who's been alright for the Huskies in his career, despite not playing against the greatest competition in the world. But I think the biggest name that they brought in is no doubt 5-star recruit Jordan Seaton, a player that is expected to start as a true freshman at left tackle, and is exactly what this team needs. He's an exceptional athlete and was the number 1 offensive tackle recruit coming into this college football class. And I think one thing Colorado now has is depth at the offensive line. Benson, Walker, Johnson, Mayers, Seaton, not every guy is going to be able to start for this team, but you now have options that this team didn't have last year. If you give Shedeur Sanders enough time to dissect the defense, he's an excellent decision maker with the football. Now I think he has that pass blocking in front of him that is going to allow him to read defenses. On top of that, the weapons for Colorado last year were okay. I like Omarion Miller. I like some of the guys they had, but I didn't feel they had a true standout number 2. They had a hodgepodge of guys that every week it seemed to be a different guy for this team. But I think now they can kind of let Travishunter play his best position, which in my opinion is defensive back, and they have weapons for Shedeur Sanders. LeJontay Wester was one of college football's best-kept secrets at FAU, as he produced 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns last season for the Owls. I think he's going to be the true vertical receiver that Colorado needs. He is a little bit undersized, but he's got the speed that this team needs on the outside, and they also brought in that true possession, jump ball, physical receiver in Will Shepard, coming from Vanderbilt, a player that I absolutely love. I think he's going to be a fantastic addition to this team. And those are 2 wide receivers that have legit NFL draft upside that they didn't have last year. They also bring in Dallin Hayden from Ohio State to be that running back and completely fulfill this offense They have weapons that they didn't have last year. And I think that's another thing that is going to bode very well. And if things go well, I think this could be one of the best offenses as a whole in all of college football. There are more questions than answers on the defensive side of the ball, but I do think they made some moves that give me hope. The Buffs made the right moves, particularly off the edge. BJ Green was a guy who initially had flipped his commitment from Arizona State to Washington. Kalen DeBoer took the Alabama job, and he committed to Colorado. He is a quick edge rusher who has been a pressure machine for Arizona State over the last few seasons, and I think he immediately steps in to a much-needed role here in Boulder to be their number one edge rusher. Deion Haynes and Samuel Okunlola, both coming over from Pitt, are two other defensive linemen that this team desperately needed, who honestly graded out pretty well as run defenders. They both set the edge well in the run game, and while the coverage was good last year, if you can't create pressure up front, coverage is going to eventually break down. Colorado added some nice edge rushers who I think could be exactly what this team lacked last season. The interior made some moves as well, and I was really impressed with the job that Coach Prime and this coaching staff did to improve this roster as a whole. So why do I think Colorado can contend in the Big 12? All I did was name names that many of you probably don't care about. But at the end of the day, talent wins you football games. This is a Colorado team who, despite losing 41 players in the transfer portal, upgraded nearly everywhere. Cormani McLean was probably the biggest name they lost, and they brought in Preston Hodge from Liberty, who was one of the best corners in all of college football last year. But not only that, the competition around them in their conference isn't as good as it was last year. The culture, is it conducive to winning? We've yet to see that yet. While there is a lot to like about what we saw last year in terms of the competitiveness and in terms of the confidence that this team ensues, we haven't seen it lead to wins yet. But I trust what Colorado is building. Many people are betting on Colorado to win the college football playoff in 2024. And while I don't think they go that far, I do think that this is a team that a lot of people are sleeping on heavily. We knew that the defensive line was bad last year. Now it looks like a potential strength. The offensive line is massively improved. The wide receiver room is loaded. And you're returning one of the top skill positions and one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football and two potential top 10 picks next season. Everything is there for this team to compete. They answered the call. They improved this roster mightily. The culture has been set. And I think Prime in Colorado is going to be a tough team to play week in and week out. They were last year. They were competitive. And I think that if the cards fall right, this team has the potential to be in the Big 12 title game. The offensive line is going to protect Shedeur Sanders. He's a good decision maker. And if the defense can step up, I think Colorado has legit college football playoff hopes in the 2024 season.